tonight's dialogue's question, and that is, how can contemporary architecture, urban spaces impact local communities and Muslim communities around the world? And I think 2 points I can emphasize real quickly about this. The first is, when you think of contemporary architecture, don't necessarily think of glass, steel, and concrete. And the second one is that urban spaces are extremely important, yet they're harder to define and to think about usually than a building. So with those two things in mind, I think we can get started. Thank you.
Welcome once again, everyone. Today I get to introduce two amazing speakers. Of course, I'm not introducing Andre, but he's amazing as well. But I'm doing introductions for Khalil and Saif. Khalil Pirani. First, I'll introduce Khalil. He is a senior architect practicing in Boston for over 25 years with a focus on higher education, institutional buildings, public projects, and airport designs. Khalil has been a visiting scholar at MIT, has written several articles about architecture and cultural sensitivity, and has co-edited a book, Understanding Islamic Architecture, with Professor Attilio Petruccio, published by Taylor and Francis in 2000. Khalil has moderated discussion panels on the Aga Khan Award for Architecture and made presentations on role of culture in improving quality of life. This is his professional intro, but on a very personal note, Khalil was instrumental in getting us connected to a recipient, Aga Khan Award for Architecture recipient, Saif, who I'm going to be introducing next. But Khalil, I want to take this opportunity to thank you, not only for agreeing to be part of this presentation and series, but also getting us connected to Saif. Like, we really had to route through, several people to get to Saif. So thank you, Khalil, for your contribution to the series. And Saif, first and foremost, congratulations, Saif. He is the recipient of the Aga Khan Award for Architecture in the last series in 2019. He's the principal of Dhaka-based architectural practice, Saif Ul Haque. And he's director of research and design program at the Bengal Institute for Architecture, Landscapes and Settlements. His works include residential, institutional, and industrial facilities that have been published and exhibited in and outside Bangladesh. His recent work, Arcadia Education Project, is the recipient of Aga Khan Award for Architecture 2019. His research interests include environment, architecture, and urbanism. And on my personal note for Saif, I want to say that thank you, Saif, for being here. I know he's going to speak to us, from Bangladesh. It's 6 in the morning for him, and he's, both our speakers and all the speakers have devoted a lot of time in preparing for this session. So I appreciate you being here and your time. So with that, I'm going to hand over the floor to get us started with Khalil. Khalil?
Thank you, Almas. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Almas, shall I share my screen? Am I sharing it?
Yes, please.
Okay, so let's do that. So I think, like we heard today, good evening, everybody. We are going to be talking about Aga Khan Award for Architecture. And I think there's a lot to cover, so I'll try to be quick, but feel free to interrupt and ask questions. We will be taking breaks to pose and take some questions here and there, but I have about 35 to 40 minutes to talk about the program of the Aga Khan Award, and then we'll pass it to Saif, and he's going to talk about his award-winning project in Bangladesh. At the outset, I think I wanted to say that award is more like, it's not about like a beauty contest or anything. It's all about a process. It's a value system. It has certain, guidelines based on which it sort of looks at buildings. It has a totally different view of looking at built environment, and even architecture is defined differently for the Aga Khan Award for Architecture. Unlike the Pritzker Award that we have here, or in UK we have the RIBA Award. This program looks at buildings in a very different context. To it, the architecture is only one component of the, what is going on in the societies, right? I think they're talking about contemporary Muslim societies. It sort of likes to treat it more like a built environment in which you get landscapes, you get wetlands, you get cemeteries, you have all kinds of stuff that relates to a human on earth, how human societies are going through on a day-to-day basis. Because we know not much of it, we architects don't design a whole lot on this planet, right? We do very little. It's more the rest of the human society, how they sort of take their day-to-day stuff, how they build environment, how they live through it. And I think this is where the award is going. It's more in like a socially responsible way of conducting the built environment. So quickly, it was established in '77. I'm not going to read through all the bullet points, but I'll let you read it. But I'll touch upon some major ones. It's given once in a 3-year cycle. It's about $1 million. Has takes sort of it's split between 5 or 6 recipients, and it's not just like the recipients are given the money and here you go and you're done. No, I think Saif is going to more talk about it, but there sort of is an education process behind it. There are publications that happen every year. There are seminars that take place, in different cities, because it's all about creating awareness. It's about educating people. It's about educating the clients, educating craftsmen, educating builders, educating contractors, and of course, architects, landscape architects and planners as well. There's a quick quote here, which is, I think, sort of sets the foundation of the award. And it says that it was born out of the concern for quality of life, rather than just the professional dynamics of architecture as it's known in the Western world, right? I think this sort of quote sets the tone of why the award was created, right? And it was seen as a moral obligation for His Highness the Aga Khan, who is the founder of this program. And I think some historical backgrounds, I think the award, like we talked, it was sort of established in '77, but much prior to that, let's say in the colonial period, in many Muslim societies, I think there was a sort of a kind of sort of a lull in the, I would say, in the awareness of the built environment, because Muslim architecture was very popular, right? In the past, I would say almost 1300 years. But in the last couple of 100 years, there was this little bit of gap. There was a little bit of quietness. And where I think His Highness says in one of his quotes, is like, as if there was a vast desert of silence, right? In these last couple of centuries. So I think it was due to that reason when His Highness felt the need to sort of create this award and establish the award. All right, let's go down to the other one. And I think, well, like we talked, it's more about a process. It's also, of course, recognizing good architecture, good built environment. But it's also about a process to educate people. This is a sort of a program, this project, this image that you see is from the last cycle in Tatarstan. It's more like a public projects that got the award. And on the left is we'll see the video on this one. It's a park in Denmark. It's a public park in the city, in an urban area, that got the award, right? So it's very little architecture, but it's more about what spaces are doing for the human societies. And this is another quote, and it's all about a value system. It's about promoting pluralism, helping the people in need, looking after the environment, of course, as we do that here in this country with LEED certifications, reviving history, maintaining the cultural continuity, and then also there's another concept which is pretty important here. Which says about those separations between Deen and Dunya. The concept of Deen and Dunya is more about how the material world or material life interacts with the spiritual life. And I think in Islam, there is a good connection in certain interpretations of Islam, I should say. It's like the separation is very tight. They are very interdependent, they are interlinked. And what I think His Highness in this quote is saying is that in Islam, it's a special connection of how the faith interacts with the worldly affairs of a human being, right? And this is how I think a lot of the good architecture in the past was based off of it. Because in the Quran, there's a lot of sort of discussion about paradise and what life could be in paradise. And I think a lot of the Muslim architects in the past were trying to replicate that into this world, right? They were trying to bring it into this world, that kind of concept. And that's one interpretation how faith can influence our lives on earth, right? They're trying to replicate those kind of conditions on earth. Sorry, I'm trying to go a little bit quickly because there's quite a bit of material to cover. And of course, this being the good stewards on earth, as we sort of do that for several projects in this country as well. And it's also about looking after the nature, right? Looking after the society and the environment in which we live, and to leave a better place for the future generations. Shall we pause here? Any questions? We can take one or two questions and then we could move on. Or if not, then we could continue.
Yeah, I think for participants, you can open your mic or you can put your questions in the chat as we have done before.
And about a question, I guess you could say, do you want us to raise our hands if we do have questions before we unmute ourselves?
Sure, that'd work, yeah.
Using the, okay, cool. Yeah. I don't have a question now, I'm just saying for
okay.
future.
Yeah, sure. So let's continue, yeah.
Khalil, I actually had a question if I could briefly ask it. So this idea of like cultural memory fading and that, you know, if there is a loss of say awareness of architectural history or architectural design techniques and things, was that the concern there, that, you know, architects weren't employing the sort of heritage of the Islamic world?
Yeah, I think the concern was primarily because what used to happen in Lee was people would try to imitate the other societies, Western societies especially. Mm-hmm. And let's say, for example, in one part of the sort of Pakistan where I had visited years ago, almost 20 some years ago, so they had like a good built environment using their local materials of wood and stone and all those things. But to them, concrete was better, glass was better. It more for them, it was a sign of development. So it's kind of like looking the other way and ignoring your own culture as if, you know, something outside is better. I mean, that's one example, Lee. And at the same time, there was this not knowing your own culture, your own identity. The colonization had put a little bit of sense of inferiority in a lot of people's minds. So it was a mix of a lot of these things that they were sort of, I think, sort of losing their continuity with the local culture. Am I answering the question?
Yes, thank you so much. You definitely did. I see Fahim has his hand raised, and Sabina also put a question in the chat. Yeah. In each 3-year cycle, has disease, pandemic, war, conflict affected the range of award winners or applicants?
Yeah, I think it does look like it sort of awards mostly the built environment, but they do look at the contemporary issues. And I think in the next round of our talk, in the next few minutes, I'm going to show the process, how the awards are sort of, you know, what are the bodies that go through the different decision making. So I think that'll help how sort of subjects are decided, or what topics or what issues in the society to sort of look into, because it's a constantly evolving society, right? Societies change pretty much every day and every year and every century. So those kind of issues are contemporary, looked at it very carefully. Was there any other questions, please?
Yeah, Fahim, please go ahead.
I actually have a question now. Last meeting that we had, we actually discussed a little bit about this, of using certain techniques in different parts of the world were developed because of the equipment they had around. For example, we spoke about the fact that if you look at the heritage sites, most of them are not in the cradle of life, even though there's more history in the cradle of life than anywhere else, just because many of the structures did not last as long because they needed more upkeep or whatever, you know, other reasons. How do you balance the idea of trying to maintain a historical building? Well, let me rephrase that. How do you guys look at, for example, honoring old ways of building with new materials? Because it is kind of hard to deny that newer materials do last longer than old ways. Is it just taking a facade and putting it on the outside to give it a look of something older? Or is it actually incorporating old techniques with new to try to create something different?
I don't know the answer, and I'll tell you why. That's a good question, very good question. I think it's about the sort of the concept, the ethos, the values behind which you build based on your history, right? You cannot imitate the history, like you said, right? We cannot take that and mimic it or copy it. Neither you could take old materials and try to replicate today, no. But I think as you see some of the awarded projects, right, you'll get a sense of it, how to really base your design concept into your own roots of a certain society, and you build out of it using new materials, new techniques, it could be any of that, because you have to keep your local population engaged, right? They have to have roots in their own societies. And then you take whatever materials you have and build off of it. So there has to be that connection, which is very hard to describe, but I think you will see from examples as you see more and more of these, how those transitions are happening without imitating, without copying, without using old materials, but at the same time having a relationship. It's like, you know, us, how we're having a relationship with our grandparents or our great-grandfathers, right? You cannot sort of imitate them, correct? But you can take their values, take their guidance, take how they used to be. Of course, we won't be able to live in that kind of home they used to live, correct? But you have to take their values and sort of embrace them and be proud of it and sort of make it part of your identity. So I'm trying to answer, you know, in sort of a philosophical way, but hopefully that helps to answer the question. But it's a very good question. It's a very loaded question. It will take a lot more discussion to really come around it. Yeah. Does that help, right? So let's continue. Yeah.
I don't know if you can see your webcam, but Fahim put his thumbs up. So
okay, sorry, no, I can't see it. It's only, like you said, when I share screen, I don't see much of it. What's on the web. So all right, so let's continue. So the award has three main bodies, and those bodies are, first is the steering committee, which is more like a think tank at the top, and those members sort of change. I think not all of them together, but they change it slowly every 3 years. So that's like the guiding body of the award. Then there is the independent master jury. Those are sort of picked every 3 years, all of them new in each cycle, and they have the only right to pick a project. So they are the independent master jury, and they make their own decision. And then the last one is the on-site reviewers. These are the sort of professionals who go out in the field to evaluate the project based on the shortlist that the master jury picks. So they go out, they interview people, and each project has to be in existence for at least a year. So the on-site reviewers can go look at it. How does it, what the people have to say about it? What are the comments? What are the reviews about it? And they come back and they inform the master jury about the shortlisted projects. And this is the master jury from the last cycle. Sorry, I haven't updated. The recent, I think for the next cycle in 2022, they haven't announced the master jury yet, but the steering committee has been announced. Yeah. So the on-site reviewers, like I mentioned, they go on field and they look at the projects, they evaluate the projects. So there is a quick 3-minute video. Let's take a look at it. I think it'll sort of help put more light in how this on-site review process works in the program.
The jury meets to consider nominations and select a shortlist. The shortlisted finalists are then visited on site by expert reviewers who collect information on all aspects of each project.
You do less than you do. They use the traditional measuring system.
So what the technical reviewer does is go right into the detail, check all the figures and facts at one level, but also get the real experience of the people, how the people are using the building, so that you can put a much deeper picture together for the master jury to assess.
The reviewers present their findings in person to the master jury to help them decide which of the finalists should be awarded the ultimate prize.
Insisted on specifying it like that.
I was totally amazed with the level of details that's been discovered by the reviewers.
You're entering behind the students.
I've said before in juries of pure architecture, this is different, this is totally different.
Our technical reviewers were magnificent.
Some of the walls which don't come.
They are fantastic storytellers, and conversation with technical reviewers were one of the highlights of this particular cycle review for me.
From that analysis, it allowed us as a jury to quickly understand which projects really achieved excellence and went beyond just the imagery of photographs that were presented to us.
Okay, so I think let's continue. We are going to look at some examples of few projects, right? So this one, the first one I wanted to share, it's not a building, it's a bridge, and it's a bridge in Iran. And you would wonder, right, why would a bridge get an award? So I think we have another 2-3 minute video on it, but the reason the bridge got an award, because it's not only just like letting people pass from point A to point B, but it's also a place for people to go to in the evening if it's a good weather, for people like to hang around. And it has improved the quality of life of people of the area. The bridge is pretty much spanning over two large highways. So you could see, and then they have added restaurants in it. There are benches for people to sit around and enjoy the place. So it has become a very popular visiting point. And I think one of the things that we talked about, the award is looking for what a project or an environment is doing to help improve the quality of life of people. I think that's the bottom line thing that the award is after. How is it improving the quality of people? And it could be at any level. It could be for poor people, it could be for rich people, but what is the environment doing for them? So let's see, we could try to look at this video real quick.
The very first thing that came to my mind was that the bridge can be a place to stay, not a place to pass.
This metal bridge has connected two sides of nature. Even though it's full of steel, I don't feel that I'm walking in a space made of steel. I feel like I'm walking in a forest.
We have some 50 to 60% of the population of young people. They're obliging authorities, the government, and all the establishment to change and to move towards something more modern and more contemporary.
This bridge is the result of a competition between approximately 16 Iranian companies experienced in making bridges.
The Tabiat pedestrian bridge opened in 2014 and was visited by around 4 million people in its first year.
I like this bridge very much. It gives me positive energy, and every time I feel low, I come here to get re-energized.
All right, so then that was the bridge. The other project I wanted to share quickly is, it's been a while. This was awarded. This is back in late 80s. It was a housing project in Bangladesh, which was based on a microfinance system. And this is for people who had no homes at all. So I think a microfinance loan of about $300 was given to each family. Off of the $300, they had to go and buy some building materials like roof sheets, columns, and some walls, which are made more out of jute material. So these were the components they were given, and each homeowner would go and build their homes from that $300 microfinance. And I think this sort of program became very popular and started creating villages out of several of these type of homes. They were all a little different from each other because it depends how each homeowner makes. And it really, improved the quality of life of people who had nothing, no homes at all. So this got an award back in 80s, a project like this. The next one I wanted to share is in Denmark, like I mentioned. It's a park. Now it's a non-Muslim society, Denmark, but it has, the users are from different countries, almost like 60 countries. They live in this kind of neighborhood in Copenhagen. And there were some tensions between different neighborhoods in that area. So what the architect design company did is like they created a park and they sort of brought in images from different Muslim societies. So let's take a look at the video. I think it'll sort of help better understand. These are the images of the park. And it sort of helped bring different ethnicities together in the neighborhood. So let me start this video here.
This area is one of the areas in Copenhagen with the highest crime rate, or maybe even in entire Denmark. It felt very insecure.
To make the Nørrebro neighborhood safer, the City Hall of Copenhagen decided to create a big public park. Architect Nana Gilto Müller and artist Rasmus Nielsen were in charge of the project.
In our very first walk through the area, we could see that there was a big diversity in the people living in the neighborhood. We found that it was around 60 different nations living in the area.
And rather seeing the diversity as a problem, we wanted to see it as a resource. So basically that in the park there would be elements from as many countries of the people living here through objects and stories.
The golden one is a playground from India, and the elephant slide is from Chernobyl. And the red benches over there are kind of a double bench from Switzerland. And also one of our favorites is the Moroccan fountain, where parents often sit and meet and talk while the kids are playing.
The ideas of the park was to make use of dreams that could kind of materialize into things. We divided the area in like 3 parts.
All 3 areas, they are very different. The red square is mainly for skaters. The black square is more classical square, where the locals are hanging out and kids are playing. And then the green park is more for exercise and more bigger sports activities. It's pretty easy to see today that all these different activities, they make people meet. For me, that's one of the greatest things, to see that people actually meet in the area.
We wanted to create a public space where people from a very diverse sort of backgrounds would sort of feel at home.
Our motto, yes is more. It's very much about not saying no to things, saying yes.
All right, so that was the park in Copenhagen. And the last one I wanted to share, it's a very different project. This one is in Beirut, designed by Zaha Hadid. So it's not like the award is just looking after low-key, housing for poor or anything. I mean, it has all kinds of projects. And I think I would suggest students should go to a website called arcnet.org, ARCHNET. It has all the resources of what the projects have been awarded, and many other publications are all in there in PDF format, so you can download books and volumes on the ArcNet. So this one is Zaha Hadid's building recently done at the American University in Beirut, where it was a very tight lot, and there were certain parameters at the campus that she had to meet. She had to maintain a certain footprint, and had to, try to take advantage of the good views to the sea. So I think this project, of course, you may have seen it already published elsewhere, and this was sort of nominated, and it got the award. Let me quickly share a quick video. I think that'll talk about it better.
It is the most modern and dramatic building on campus, and I think that's a sign of maturity.
The Issam Fares Institute in the American University of Beirut, Lebanon, is a creation of architect Zaha Hadid.
The building is wildly at odds with its surroundings. Yes, it's completely out of character with all the other buildings, but it's not crazily wild. It's certainly innovative and dramatic, and I like that very much. I like the fact that it creates controversy. It's really quite a conversation piece.
Zaha Hadid's works of art have marked 20th and 21st century architecture. Here in the American University of Beirut, her alma mater, she built the Issam Fares Institute. Her partner, Salim Jalil, supervised the project.
We believe that this project fits its context because it offers what is not missing, what is basically somehow missing. 21st century architecture has to influence its own age.
The whole building was conceived as to be a very heavy building or a very present building on the outside, but then on the inside, the whole thing is transparent, which reflects the idea of a think tank. A think tank is always transparent, all full of ideas and exchange.
We had to deal with the cypress trees. We could not touch them. That's why we introduced that ramp in between these two rows of trees. The 21-meter cantilever, it's not an ego thing. It's like an umbrella which provides a cover or shade, and it becomes a social space. To me, the whole building is a surprise in itself because it makes you discover. It doesn't really tell you what it is, but it allows you to discover and to find out and to learn.
It's not simply a building that is providing a space, but also it gives you the opportunity to think.
All right, I think I'm going to stop here. This last quote is from His Highness. It's all about talking about the pursuit of human dignity, right? And that's the sort of bottom line, sort of like we talked about quality of life of people. So we're going to take questions early here, or if we have time, I could introduce Saif. We'll go on to Saif, and then we take questions later on.
I just wanted to make sure Nilam's question or comment, I suppose, was voiced for those who can't see the chat. She mentioned relating to the microfinance house project, so about empowering to be able to build your own home and uplift the quality of your family's life with your own hands. And I think that's probably one of the values that the steering or the master jury saw in that project.
Right. I think empowering people, totally, you're right. Yeah.
Fahim, it looks like you got a hand up again.
I always have questions. It was mentioned that in order to qualify, the building or structure that's taken into consideration has to be made for at least a year. Yeah. Do you guys weigh how long a building has been around in your judgment? Because it was mentioned in the video that they also take into consideration how the locals use that building. A building that's been around longer has more history, and you have more empirical evidence saying this is how this has affected the surrounding area, whereas a newer building is all theoretical up until a certain point. But also part two, I noticed with 3 of the buildings that you showed us, they all look like they could have been something to increase tourism. They would have brought people to the area, increasing the overall wealth of the area. Whereas the other one was like what that was said, was to help bring homes to the poor around them. How much do you weigh personal individual benefit, like building the house projects, versus societal benefits of creating something that potentially bring more tourism, which brings more jobs and money to the area?
So good questions, Rahim. And I think the answer would be not like each project may not give you answers to all the questions, I would say. Each project may sort of answer some of your questions or some of the benefits that we're looking for, like the housing project we saw in Bangladesh. Like it was just for those individual families. Whereas, let's say the bridge was probably more about, it does pull tourism, no question, it does. But it was also about having a place for people to go to, right? Because in some countries, unlike North America, they don't have a whole lot of things to do in the evening. Like here, we would have a soccer game or a baseball match or some place to go to or eat out. In some countries, from my childhood, I could see there was not a whole lot to do. So these kind of places to go to help improve their quality of life for people. The third project, like Zahadi's project, it's a very controversial project, I would say, right? Like you asked the question earlier, how do you design something that will relate to that culture? Now, people could take it apart differently. I would say people will interpret that project very differently. But to some people, this is a sign of contemporary design. It's a sign of progress. It's a sign of, like looking forward into the future. So, and of course, it will definitely bring tourism too. So I think in each project, I would say, is sort of looked at differently. And remember, the master jury is changing every 3 years. So some of the questions, some of the projects, they would answer, but none of us probably would agree, right? And His Highness said that in the beginning, it's okay to be controversial. I think he's giving them the freedom. The steering committee is giving the full freedom to the master jury. Go guys, go and pick whatever you want to pick and let it be controversial. And I think the good thing, last point is, the good thing about the design is it has some rules, but it does not have a lot of rules, right? It's very personal. It's very interpretive. Like each person or any of us in this discussion will interpret a building differently, I would say. And that's kind of the fun of the design, right? It's kind of like having a nice dish to eat. Some people may like it, some may not like it. Some may take it differently. And that's sort of the good and bad of the design. So sorry, I don't know if I'm answering your question, but some thoughts on this thing. Yeah. I think, yeah, we can take any more questions, Lee or Almaz, or you think we should move on? It's almost 42 now, past the hour.
Yeah, maybe we should welcome Saif, and then if anyone comes with any questions, they can ask them later.
Wonderful. I think I'll pass you to Saif, but I think this is now we have a sort of architect, a winner of the project, and I think we'll now get into a very deep dive of one project and hear from Saif on this project. Now, I'll pass it to you, Saif. All yours.
Well, I think you have given a fantastic background to our program. Here in Bangladesh, work has had a very good influence on the architecture. And you know that quite a number of projects from Bangladesh has been awarded by the Aga Khan. For the last cycle, there were 2 projects from Bangladesh that was one lovely mosque in the outskirts of Dhaka and a training facility. In the year the Grameen housing was awarded, we had the National Parliament designed by Louis Kahn, also a winner here in Bangladesh. And also another information is that the first master jury had a Bangladeshi architect Mazhar Islam, as one of the jurors. So it's Bangladesh has been connected with the awards from the very beginning, from the very inception of the award. It's a pleasure, it's a great pleasure to be a part of this workshop, Building Bridges workshop. And I'd like to thank the organizers of this workshop, the University of Texas at Arlington and the Aga Khan Council for inviting me to participate. Thank you for the invitation. So I will be prompting Nahid to change the slides. So I'll go like, so I'll start with this slide, and somehow it also fits with the title of our workshop, Building Bridges. And when we talk about bridges, the image that comes to our mind is the infrastructure. And Khalil had shown that lovely pedestrian bridge in Tehran, which was the award winner. So bridges, we build bridges because we want to connect. I mean, here in this lovely bridge, I found it very lovely, very fascinating, in a rural setting in Bangladesh, made of bamboo, connecting two sides of a small canal, and it was in the dry condition. And you can see that how ingeniously people have built this bridge with whatever material was available locally. Not much of an engineering here, but definitely ingenuity. And this bamboo post allow the platforms of the bridge to be raised when the water level rises. So it's a flexible bridge. It adjusts to the level of water. The project that I will be sharing, I'll be discussing, has a similar issue. So I think this could be a good slide to start the conversation or discussion, building bridges. So next slide. Yes, and then comes this, our location in different places. I can see Leah smiling, seeing the slide, but this is how it is like. So many of you are in Arlington, where this being hosted from, and I'm in Dhaka. And we are divided by this 11 hours of time difference. It's morning here and you are there in the evening. The sun is rising, already risen, and in Arlington the sun has gone down. But it's the same sun. We share the same sun. Dhaka does not have a different sun, or Arlington doesn't have a different sun. So we are from the same planet, located at different places, divided by thousands of miles. And as I was mentioning, when we talk about bridges, they are about connections. Same about our desires. We feel like that we should be connected. We have to be connected, no matter wherever we are located. And this is possible, this connection, because of the developments of communication technology. I mean, imagine this symposium happening. The pandemic has caused us a lot of distress, disruptions, but this has also given us this opportunity of connecting simultaneously and holding this kind of discussion, symposium. So I think this is something to take note of. Next slide, please. Okay, then there's this talking of connectivity. We live in a differentiated world, and the need for connectivity cannot be underestimated. We need to be connected, as I was mentioning, and these are the bridges that we build in the web, in the net, and through this communication technology. So bridges are taking new forms, different meanings. Bridges are not only physical infrastructure. Bridges can be invisible. So all these lines that are connecting all these places, they're also bridges. So I'm sure this workshop will produce very interesting films that the participants are working on when they explore the concepts of this kind of connectivity, about the different locations, places. So when we're talking about architecture, architecture is also not free from these possibilities of connection. It's not that we do things in isolation. And there is a scope of learning from our experiences, from our situation, and more we share our work, more we discuss about them, I think we understand each other better, and we can free ourselves from a narrower view of the world with a much more broader view of things. Things that happen in faraway places can act as sources of inspiration, and to build an inclusive and a sustainable world, we need to be more connected than ever before. The challenges that we face today, the challenge of climate change, inequality, and the recent incident of the pandemic, we all need to face them collectively and through connected actions. So together and connected, not separately, not isolated. So when I'm talking about connections, I'm kind of reminded of Louis Khan. And it's very difficult for me from Bangladesh to be not being reminded of Khan. Khan is very much present. And he did a wonderful work here in Dhaka, which I mentioned, that one of the winners of the award. And then not far from Arlington, Fort Worth, where he has another lovely work. I had the chance of visiting, though this photograph is not from my visit, it's taken from the net. Because at that time, there was this new extension that was being built, and I could not take the photograph. But you see how Bangladesh and USA is connected. And not now, not right now. Way back in the 60s, people here invited the architect from USA to come and design the most important building of their country, the parliament. I said the Dhaka parliament is the most important building of our country. And Khan was the architect who was invited. So you have this connection between Texas or Dallas and then Dhaka and Bangladesh. I will sort of quote from Khan, because it's not only his building, because his words are so inspiring that you can, I think you can, if you read what he has said, is good enough to take you to a much deeper world of architecture. So he goes like this, and these are from his initial thoughts in Dhaka, and he mentions about connection. In our way of life, we can be far away and still feel the connection. You can learn from this sense of connection that there is an architecture of connection. Whether it be the avenue, which is in sympathy with the rhythm of trees, or the place of stopping where the sound of water is heard, or the establishment of an order of squares so that you can feel that there are centers around which things can generate. So whenever we are given a project, I think we try to look for this kind of connections, that what will connect what we are designing to the place where it is going to be built, to the people who will be using it. So I find that a very important thing. And when I came across this Khan's words about connection, way back in the 60s, when he came all the way from USA, when he landed in Dhaka, he was feeling this that he was feeling a kind of a connection. So I think we have a very important topic here, bridge building. Next slide. And when we talk about connections, to me, architecture is about making connections. Connections, as I mentioned, with people, with places, history, culture, and connecting to the future also, that we may not be able to see exactly, but we can imagine. So we can connect to that future. So I think this is an important aspect. And a project that can begin by looking into this connections, understanding the connections, and then gradually moving and building these connections into some sort of visible thing. It can be in drawings if it is not built, and if it is built, one can also go and see that how the architect has interpreted those connections and realized it in a built form. So here in this slide, I'm showing some examples of architecture here in Bangladesh, and they date back from 3rd century BC to the colonial period. And every period, you will see that people had given importance to something that they can be connected with. If it is a Buddhist monastery, there was a thinking that how the monastery should be like, how the temple should be designed, or if it was a Muslim mosque, there was a thinking what it should be connected with. I mean, these connections can be spiritual, like in religion. When you build a mosque, you like to be connected with a power that you are not being able to see, but you are believing in. And then if it is a material work like a palace or some sort of a educational institution, in Islam we have this madrasas, in Buddhism we have these viharas, institutions that people come for learning. So it is not a question of what the purpose, but how you try to look into the connection. Okay. Next slide, please. Now, coming to my work, I have been sort of practicing for quite a while now, been about more than 3 decades. And when I got into practice, it was late 20th century, 1980s, beginning of 80s. And like in other places here in Bangladesh, there was a lot of changes happening. And the change was kind of, it was like from developing out of a kind of a critical view of the banal modernism that had taken over the world of architecture. I mean, you were seeing same type of buildings or built environment going around in all the places. I mean, you could not make a difference between Lagos and Dhaka or Boston or Singapore. I mean, there's one world, but each place has its own particular qualities, distinctions, characters. So how can architecture respond to that? And that's where also Aga Khan Award played an important role, because that's the time when the award got initiated. And I think it was the same year, 1983, when the first award was announced. I also graduated from the School of Architecture. So it has been there since I started practicing. So what I'm showing here, there are examples of 4 of my works done in the 90s and the early 2000s. These projects are connected to people who are trying to bring a change to their life. They are less privileged than many others. So, for example, the project in the left-hand corner, top side, is a training center for people from the villages, and it is built by one of the world's largest NGO called BRAC. We are quite familiar. And so they decided to build this training center in a village where they could bring villagers who could stay here for a week or so and get some basic training about how to organize themselves, how to look into better health and better economic aspects of life, all this kind of even legal, empowering, we're talking about empowerment, empowering people about their rights. I mean, for Bangladesh, it was very important that how this huge population can organize and take itself into a world of better life. It's quite a challenging situation way back in the 70s and 80s for Bangladesh. On the right-hand side, top right, there's another training center in another location. And we were trying to connect the environment, the built environment, with the tradition, with the traditional form of architecture, where the building spaces, the building form would reflect local architectural sources. In the bottom left, this is a hostel for students who would be going to a university next to this hostel, but this is not a university building. This hostel building was supported by the Italian Red Cross Society, built for the Buddhist community and built, designed by a Muslim architect. So here we find a combination, same with the parliament. I mean, this American architect of Jewish background who built one of the loveliest mosques, contemporary mosques. So you have these things of that participation, interactions between different cultures, different religions, different conditions. So here I had this opportunity of working for an Italian priest, for Buddhist students. And it was an amazing experience. And they loved the way I tried to do an architecture for a community which I was, Buddhist. It was quite well appreciated. And on the bottom right, it's a very basic structure built in another village, a small education center for girls, adolescent girls, who drop out of schools because they have to help their families, and then they get married off without getting much of an education. So this center was supported by an organization who wanted education to be available to these girls before they get into, with their own lives. So this is the kind of experience, project experience that I was gathering, I was doing, and not much have been built, but this is an example that I would like to share with you before I move into the school project. Next. And now here comes the school. So in 2011, I got this invitation, opportunity to design a school, small school, a preschool on the outskirts of Dhaka. I was quite excited because I love this kind of institutional facilities. So I agreed that yes, I'd love to take up this project. And then I was taken to this site. And I will be narrating the entire experience from my first visit to this site till the receiving of this award, which here in this workshop. So in the following slides, one after another, I'll be narrating the experience so that we all can, you can know that how the whole thing proceeded. Next one. So let me start first with the introduction to the client. Meet Razia Alam. She is the chairperson of Malika Welfare Trust. And she's the one who initiated the project. She also happens to be my aunt, my mother's youngest sister. So this is a connection again. So I was the nephew and she was looking for an architect. So before looking far, she saw that why not ask my nephew if he could help me design this school. And she's still a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of spirit. She's always trying to do something. And now she had spent a good amount of her life, in fact, most of her life in UK, and she worked in a school as a teacher. She decided to come back to her ancestral home, back to Bangladesh. And she wanted to do something here in Bangladesh after living about 4 decades, 40 years in London. She decides and she brings back her savings. She starts a small initiative. Initially, she worked with another.
Well, I wonder, while we're trying to get Saif back, Khalil, Sophia had a question in the chat, if you would like to address it.
Yep.
What is the fine line between empowerment of communities and saviorhood? How does the jury, speaking of the award for architecture, evaluate a project's sustainable impact on a community's quality of life? And like Fahim asked, is 1 year enough time to gauge that impact?
Right. I think that's the call for the award committee, right? To decide. So for now, they used to do it at, one is the minimum year, one is minimum. Of course, it could be longer, but they want to see a project at least in some form of existence, unlike other award programs. So it's one of those things that the award committee has decided to keep it as a 1 year minimum. But I can see the point. What our panelists, the participants are raising is that enough? Right? That's a good one. And it may be enough. It may not be enough, depending on the project. But that's a good, valid point as to you probably need more time to evaluate a project and understand its impact on the people whom the project is serving. So.
I also briefly had a question. I wonder if you could address. So I don't know if how much knowledge there is in the boardrooms, but is there a consideration maybe of the types of projects that are awarded in each cycle, like whether there's a diversity of projects awarded in each cycle, or is that something that's part of the discussion?
It's part of the discussion, and I think, like we talked, the master jury is definitely new every 3 years. It's a new set of people in there, and they're not just designers. They are social scientists, they are educators, they are philosophers, they are thinkers, they're musicians. So they are sort of looking at different, all kinds of aspects of people's life. Then the steering committee also continuously changes, but not all of them together, but some of them continuously evolving to look at the issues. Look issues in the society, what should be looked at in each cycle. I think, yeah. So we can continue on that. Yeah,
yes, we lost you a bit.
Yeah, I didn't go. The electricity left.
Oh no!
No. So all of a sudden I discovered that we have a power outage. So the standby generation. We also have a little bit of a different weather now. There's a cyclone very close by. I think that it could be also disrupting the power. Anyway, let me get back to Razia Alam. I'm sorry that I hope that I have to give you a warning that if I go off like this, the internet connection can go off, the power can go off. There could be anything happening.
Well, we send our thoughts, my goodness. Yes, we want you to be safe.
No, thank you so much. So getting back to Razia Alam, she has been involved with some other voluntary organization doing social work. And then she decided that she wanted to do something of her own. And she started a small school and a plant nursery for children. This was just outside on the edge of Dhaka. She was doing it successfully, but that place was leased. It was a rented place, and after being there in that place for 5 years, she could not manage to renew the lease, and she needed to find a new place. So she had bought a new place. She bought it, and she took me to see this place in 2011, in the autumn of 2011. Next slide. Yeah. So when she took me to this place, interesting that there was a bridge that was connecting. So bridges come everywhere. So here is a bridge that was connecting two sides of a river, and we got out of the transport and stood on the bridge, and then she showed me that this is where I want to build a school. I said, where exactly you want to build a school? She pointed out to a place which was underwater. And I told her that I don't see any land that are able to build the school. Don't worry, she assured me that in a few weeks' time, land will emerge. It will be on land. And when I looked at the place, I knew what I was looking at. That's one of the floodplains that we have plenty here in Bangladesh. In a deltaic country, we get a lot of floods. We have all these major rivers, Ganges, Brahmaputra, all flowing through Bangladesh. So floodplains are part of our natural landscape topography, and dwelling here, inhabiting here is a difficult and a tricky situation. So in the rural areas, people have devised ways. But interestingly, that during monsoon, these places are flooded, inundated. But in the dry condition, we have about 4 to 5 months of monsoon, and rest of the period of the year is dry. So if you look at the map on the right-hand side, that water kind of recedes back into these lakes and other channels. Next slide. And then there you can see that there are types of floods also. Not all are same floods. So floods also have variation, variety of floods. There are early floods, flash floods, there are long duration floods, floods from the Ganges, floods from the Brahmaputra, and all these kind of things. And then they're classified, the floodplains are classified, the flood types are classified. So we are in a place where water is a major thing to take into consideration. When I was putting together the presentation, I mentioned about connecting with the environment. So the work that I was doing was more to do with how better one can connect to the environment. And these days, it is more important for us to understand that in architecture. I mean, there are so many things we look into architecture, but at times we lose sight of the fact that environment needs to be connected. We just can't do anything and just get away with it, because at this stage of the world, we face environmental issues. We're talking about extinction. Next slide, please. Yeah, so this is a kind of a zoomed view of a Bangladeshi landscape topography. And you can see that I would love to say the veins of Bangladesh. I mean, all this is a watershed study, how one can map the way rain finds its way into the canals and into the rivers, and how land is formed. So if we are going to build something here, if we're going to make changes, we must take into account of this particular situation. So everywhere, whether you are in Texas or whether you are in Kenya, anywhere in the world, I think one needs to pay, pay a particular attention to the place where one is building. And Louis Kahn, when he came here, he was sensitive to that also. It's not that all of a sudden he brought something from a different place, and he kind of tried to mediate between the Bangladesh context and the architectural ideas that he had. Next. So then we looked into the Google images, satellite images of the site that we're going to build, and I could confirm that yes, we were definitely in the floodplain. The river has shifted. The river originally flowed further north, and then it has gradually shifted, and this land has emerged because of the shifting. And this is a very natural phenomena here in Bangladesh. Land, they get eroded because of the water, and sediments form new lands. So this is a very dynamic landscape. Next, please. So this is a close-up of a satellite image which shows the dynamic experience of the landscape because of this water. The river, and all these sands that are visible, or the greeneries, are the results of the actions of the river. And whenever we want to do something, some physical intervention, we must be aware of that, how this place operates. Even if we are building bridges, we are building one of the large bridges now connecting this huge river, Ganges, just connecting the country. And we have to take into consideration how the water flow will be affected by the construction of the bridges. So connectivity also needs careful consideration. It's not that you just go and say, hey, let's build a bridge, let's get connected. It's just, so one needs to understand and proceed with the idea. Next, please. And in my travels, I have been visiting some of the places which experiences this kind of transformation. In Bangla, we have this word called shore, which means a river island, and it's a very dynamic landscape. So in the dry season, the photographs are from the same place, and it's on the river Ganges. It's the middle of the river. So during the dry season, one could just walk or wade through a dry riverbed, and then it's all dry agricultural activities. People inhabit these places, and then in the monsoon, it's a totally different scene. The pictures in the bottom are from the monsoon, when everything is underwater. And if the waters are sort of reaching your house, the floor of your house, then you call it a flood. Otherwise, it's normal. I mean, this is a very natural living. The water will come and it will go away. And I think one needs to sort of adjust to this. Next, please. So when I was offered that site to design a small preschool, I was kind of little, not hesitant, but I said that I was filled with the question that what to do over here? What should be one's response? I mean, a site that is underwater for 5 months and then dry, and then she wants to, I didn't want to disappoint my aunt. She has bought this land, and I said, okay, let me think about it, let's devise a strategy. So we looked into quite a few options, and I have some these options here on the screen. So one option, which is a very obvious option, that you would raise the place, make it flood-free, and build a school on top of that raised piece of land. Very typical traditional practice that was we do in the villages. But here, a strip of land that was available was too narrow to have a mound built. And so if we had proper slopes, the space available for the school would have been too little. And the other thing was that we really didn't want to alter the natural topography, because that's what has been happening in other places, especially in Dhaka, that we are transforming all these natural features and filling. We may be disconnected because the power just came. So I warn you, 1 or 2 minutes, the net will be switching off. So be prepared for that transition. I will keep on talking, and let's hope that that doesn't happen. Anyway, so
there he went. Hopefully he'll be back momentarily. Khalil, if I do have a question actually from the listening audience, who that is in the Q&A, and I'll read it out to you. How does the on-site review process work at the current time when travel is not possible and a lot of places are closed? So you might not be able to gain an entrance into interiors and things like that.
That's right, and I think that's a good one for the next cycle. So for the previous cycle, things have already happened, right? This was pre-COVID because it's every 3 years. So for the next cycle, which is coming up in next year, so I think the reviewers will be going on to site, I would say, in springtime 2022. So in about 6 to 8 months from now. So I don't know the answer. It's a good one. Maybe they'll have to figure out some different ways to evaluate the projects, either remotely or maybe there is some travel still going on. Hopefully by then, maybe it might open up a little bit more. But the same question happens about master jury meeting, and they meet different times of the whole cycle to start evaluating projects and all of that. So I don't know the answer, but it's a good one for the award team to look into and think about it. Yeah.
I also wanted to ask, so what is it sort of like is the nomination process open to anyone, or the long list, I suppose, that gets to the reviewers? That's open for anyone, and then self-nomination, for example.
Yeah, you can self-nominate it, or you could go through a nominator. Yeah, that's either way, it's fine. I'm one of the nominators, but it doesn't have to go through a nominator. It could be through anybody. Anybody can nominate projects.
Looking out there and looking for great projects.
I have been looking, honestly, sniffing around, asking friends, do you know of any projects in the North America, especially, right? Because nothing has been awarded in North America or South America yet. And I think so, yeah, we are looking forward to sort of break the ice in this part of the world, yeah.
And Fahim asked, how many submissions do you get on average per cycle?
Per cycle, I would say 400-ish in that range per cycle. And the good thing is that all these projects that you get nominated, they're archived in the archives of the award, the Trust for Aga Khan Trust for Culture. And like I was saying earlier, you could see all of those in the website called ArcNet, ARCHNET. I can put it in the chat, .org. And that sort of, is like a good repository for all the projects that have been nominated. I think Saif is back with us.
Yeah, I'm back, and hopefully no more interruptions.
Nope.
Okay, so the option of raising the land. The second option was building on stilts. I mean, if we had put stilts and raised platform, that would also work. Well, yeah, that's a very suitable option, and that is used in places where the water is there all the time, all throughout the year. It's not that it's coming and going. So that was an issue here, that if it's a small school, if the place was raised on stilts, all these little children who come to the school, we thought that was one issue, a scale issue, that they had to go up about 3 to 4 meters to a platform to the school. And the other was cost, because we really developed this option, and we prepared a presentation for the client with an estimate, and it really did not nowhere near what the budget the client had for a project like this. So this led us to exploring another option, and that the option is of being a structure which could float when the water came, and it could be on the ground when the water receded. So it was like something which could be, and the client was quite excited. She was very enthusiastic. You know, I like to do this thing. I said that, well, we haven't done any projects like this before. It is going to be purely an experiment. She said that I love to join in an experiment. She decided she wants to go ahead and do this kind of a project. So we took up this project, but what we had to do, we had to sort of accommodate it between other commissions, because there was not like a regular project. We're trying to develop this idea, and she was also trying to get her funds together. So from 2011 to 2014, so the work was done intermittently with breaks. So you work for a while, and then you take a pause, and then you go into other projects, which brings you money. Make your office run. So we had to work it like that. She was also not much of a hurry. Before 2014, she managed everything, and we also developed the design. Next slide. So with our Google sketches, exploring what can be done and other studies. Next. Yeah. So we came up with a schematic design of a floating platform, which would be stationary. It was like a raft. When the water comes, it rises, and the water goes down, it settles on the ground. And it had to be light, so we chose bamboo as the material. And for the flotation, we used steel drums. I mean, the drums that have been already what we call upcycling. I mean, they have been used earlier, and then you can buy it in the market. And so we decided, we really didn't want to use so much of new materials in that way, except for natural material like bamboo. Next slide. And we also created this visualization of this proposal that we shared with the client, that how it was going to look like in the dry season and in the monsoon. Next. So by 2014, we had a site plan ready, and we had mapped the site, recorded the micro contours, and just to see that school can be built without really altering much of landscape. Next. So this is the plan that was followed for constructing, and we had to level the ground where the school was going to be located, because if it was uneven, when it settles in the dry condition, the floors are not going to be one. So we had to level it. But we did not bring anything from outside. We used the soil that was already in the site. So we filled the depression by shaving off the top. And we had a flat. The school had basically 5 similar modules. You can see the modules. One didn't have a roof, which was like open to sky play space for the children. And then there were 3 classrooms, 1 office, a toilet, a septic tank, and a water tank. Next. Yeah, and then we prepared an assembly drawing, because we are going to use people from the locality to build the school. So we wanted to illustrate the construction. We made a model and how best, because it was not something that people would do every day. I mean, it was a kind of a improvisation of traditional practices. We're using local material, but we're trying to give it a new way. That's how we decided that we will try to make the project as clear as possible to the people who will be making it. Next. Yeah. So in December 2014, we were ready to start the work. And this is how the site was like. There was a kind of a track that went over the site. The track was used by the farmers to take carrots to the river. And we had to sort of level this place and retain the natural food. Next. And throughout 2015, the construction progressed. So starting from leveling up this site to getting the drums assembled, and when the construction was being done, we had the first monsoon coming after the start, and we had to carry on working in the monsoon. So we were sort of lucky to have the raft built up, and we could work on the floating platform. So the work continued with the water on, and then the water receded, and by end of the year, the project was fairly completed. Next. And in the early 2016, it was done. This is what it presented. I mean, I've shown you images how it was like, and this is how transformed the places. Next one. And then in the same year, in 2016, we recorded how the floods were coming, and we mapped it, and we kept a record. I mean, it's not a dynamic diagram, but from different period of the year, we recorded the water and then how it flowed. Next one. And this is the kind of the ultimate flooding. So everything is one. So if you needed to go to this school, you had to have a boat, and you could have. My client also had a boat, especially made, so she could access it during the monsoon. Next one. And this is the image from the first monsoon after the school was constructed. Next one. And that was 2016, and this is 2019. These are from the Aga Khan Awards. So at the beginning of 2019, we had this surprise waiting for us. We found out that this project has been has made it to the short list. I mean, the award procedure has now 2 stages. Receiving all the nominations, and then from that, the jurors select about 20 projects. So we were, I mean, taken by surprise. We had, of course, received the invitation to submit materials earlier in 2018. But I mean, making it to the short list is like exactly winning the award. I mean, you really don't know how much difference was from the winner and your not winning it. Anyway, so it was a moment of joy, and the Aga Khan Award people, they sent all this photographers, internationally renowned photographers, videographers, and the technical assessors to come and have a look at the project to see how it is working. I mean, check all aspects. So this was taken in spring 2019. Next. So this was 3 years after the school had been in operation. So these are the photographs taken by this French photographer. Lovely showing the environment, showing the interior. Next. we also had to furnish images to the jurors that the school actually floats. So the same year in the monsoon, it was just before they were going to make their final announcement, we had to have them photographed, but for this we had to use photographers here. So this is in 2019 how the school was like during the monsoon. Next. And we also did a drone also to show that how the surrounding places. So this is what we try to do, to intervene in a landscape without transforming much of its natural. You allow this dynamic aspect to continue, and also you use it for a purpose that you need it. A small school for the villages. Next. But I have to mention that it is not that a work of an architect that gets recognized. The award has a very interesting aspect. That's why when I started the presentation, I talked about the client. Because architecture is mostly happening because of the patrons, the clients, who come forward and participates, engages the architect to do whatever he wants to do for this. I mean, that's how Khan could do a project like this in Dhaka. So here, Razia Ahmed, and then this carpenter who was given charge of leading the construction, he had no familiarity with bamboo. Neither the architect had any familiarity with bamboo, but we combined, and these were the tools. There was no electricity at site. We had some battery operated drills, and with all these basic tools, we built this school. So the name of the carpenter is Pran Vallabh, and he's also a winner, recipient of the award. It's not only the architect who gets celebrated. Next. And here in Dhaka, you can see the celebration. The actual function was held in Kazan in Kazakhstan, but in Dhaka we had another function that was organized. And you can see that the team was mostly young people, because I always get people who have just graduated, interested to come and gain some experience working. And we had an amazing group of people who had been involved at different periods, at different stages. So I think that every one of us learned something from this experience of putting this school there in the floodplains. So this is 2019, and I have to say that it's a different story in 2021. Right after the awards, everything was such a fantastic thing. But in a few months' time, you have this pandemic. In March, everything shuts down, locked down. Bangladesh has cases. The world has cases. And then that affected the project also. We could not, the client could not manage the project the way she was being able to do earlier. The travels were restricted, and the on-site management was not. Then we had a cyclone that affected the school, and then the floods. So everything combined, we are faced with a challenge not only repairing, but to some extent we have to rebuild the place. And the surrounding areas have also changed, because not all the land belonged to my aunt. So the others were also developing and changing. So we have to kind of adjust. So I guess we have to establish, again, a new connection with the place. So it's not that the connection is disrupted, but so this is what I had to share with you all. I hope I could communicate the project. Yeah, please.
Thank you so much. It's so lovely to hear about the process and to see it come to fruition, and to hear your decision-making process as well, because those are some things that non-architects rarely get visibility on, and such a unique project, I think, as well, to learn from. So thank you so much. And given our time and you know, some loss of time, I do want to move directly to Andre, but for any folks, participants, please put questions in the chat for Saif, and also additional questions for Khalil, so that we can get to those after our last presentation, and maybe communicate after as well. So Sabina is saying thank you, and I know Neelam was going to have a question, so she's the one who wants to incorporate your project already into her pitch. So we'll come back to some of those questions, but to introduce our lovely next panelist, we have Andre Tchelistcheff, and I'm so sorry, Andre, I tried to pronounce that correctly.
No, that's good. Tchelistcheff work.
So he is the principal architect of his architecture firm in New York City. He's a graduate of the Master of Architecture program at MIT, through which he learned about and interfaced with the Aga Khan Historic Cities program. And it was through his relationships there that he was funded to produce 2 short films, of which he found the tapes. From the 90s, he found the tapes, he got them digitized, and we uploaded them to YouTube. We had to do a little bit of editing, but here you're seeing stills. Thank you, Nahid, for advancing the slides. You're seeing stills from the journey to Tardistan, and then you'll also see some stills from the Boi Matai and the old city of Sana. So these are 2 films that Andre produced as a student, an architecture student, thinking about landscape and thinking about buildings. And we wanted to introduce them to you as inspiration, as examples, and also in these questions about the historic and the contemporary, and how films can really bring such things to light. So I have a few questions of Andre, and then we hopefully will have a little bit of time for additional questions. So Andre, and I'll just say, this is my favorite part of the Boi Matai film, so make sure you go and see that one. But Andre, would you describe your personal background a bit, and what drew you to these parts of the world that became the subject of your films?
Well, thank you, Leah, and thank you also to one of my mentors from the Aga Khan, Professor Masood Khan, who recommended me to Leah. And then there was talking about connections. You know, when we spent 6 years in Pakistan in the 60s, and my sister played with the mentor of Masood Khan, who was the architect Nasruddin Murad Khan. And that came out later, about this very, years later, because I was from 89 to 92 in MIT. So I was studying in the architecture program. I had grown up in the Middle East and Southeast Asia. My father was an engineer working on large World Bank infrastructure projects. And when I was at MIT, I happened into the Aga Khan program, and I found kindred spirits. In fact, 30 years later, we have a monthly reunion on Zoom, and this is largely through the pandemic. We realized we were losing connection. So from all over the world, from Pakistan, Bangladesh, Turkey, we're reconnected. But when I was in architecture school, you spend so much time in the studio. You're behind your drawing board, you're looking at technical aspects. And I had an interest in documentary filmmaking just by studying the history of it. I'd never taken any actual film classes. So as an extracurricular activity to be able to engage on these grants that I received, the one in Yemen was part of an Aga Khan workshop where 7, 8 of us were commissioned to do a study for a women's center in the old city. And we went to Yemen, and that was in 1991, the winter of 91, January. And I wanted to, as part of this, both of going to Kazan, where I got a grant from the Aga Khan to study the mosques around Kazan. And basically what I did is all of my compatriots in the Aga Khan program were highly further along, proficient in their studies, their academic. I was working really towards being a practicing architect. So I went in the library and I just looked at in the Tatarstan, but it had the least amount of information in the Aga Khan library. And there was only one book written at that time. So I said, there I have a chance actually, and I'm Russian background, I speak Russian, I have relatives in Russia. And I thought, well, let me write a grant proposal for something that there's very little of. I would love to have gone to Samarkand, but there was no way I was equipped and competing against students that were highly more proficient than I. So basically what I looked at is where was the least information and how could I contribute that? Given I have a Russian background, I was in Aga Khan, so I received that grant, and I had a matching grant from the MIT Visual Council, and it happened to be that their film department had come apart. So there was all of these equipment sitting idle because they had moved into the media lab in digital cinema. So I had all this analog equipment that they didn't need, they didn't want, so I picked up on it. And as part of my journey as an architect, I wanted to see, well, how could I use film to actually re-look, just besides sketching, that environment that I was put into. And in Kazan, I was there to document the mosque that largely had been abandoned, but I took along my camera, and it was the Soviet Union. I had no permission to go there. So I went to the imam at the largest mosque in Moscow, and I showed him the grant paper. I says, I have money that's been given to me to get to Kazan, but I have no means to get there. So he called the imam there, who's now become, he's a young imam, and they arranged, and I changed all of my possessions and I bought Soviet clothing and Soviet rucksack and went on a night train, and I lived with the imam. And the deal he had with me is, look, we're trying to raise money by dealing with these Chinese businessmen, but the Soviet apparatchik, the government official, is trying to get in our way. So the deal with this, we'll take you all around to look at the mosques, but you will translate on the side with the one of the Chinese investors spoke English. It turns out he had gone to Berkeley as a visiting student, and I had done my undergraduate work there. So the deal was I was to work around the Soviet translator and the Soviet so-called apparatchik, the government official, and they took me to these amazing areas that were largely abandoned, the springs and things, and got me into because he was the imam, to be able to film in the mosque. And unfortunately, the 30-year-old tapes, the sound, if the students looked at it, the sound in the minaret, when the call, the muezzin was calling the prayer, got dropped out. So I have to find the original tapes. So I was basically doing the films to be able to try to see engage with the environment, especially when you're with a camera and you're not of that area, what kind of engagement. And it was, except for the Soviets, the people of Tatarstan were extremely open, but I was also being escorted by the imam. And in Sana'a, I had to very quickly decide on a subject. So I was walking through the souk, and I found Matei, who would in the afternoons take his blind father, who was a porter in the souk, with his sacks of, often with the husks of the coffee, and decided to try to see the city through just by taking a lot of video. And that's why I have those examples. If you could bring up my storyboards, being an untrained filmmaker, but having studied, read film form and the film sense by Eisenstein, having an intellectual interest, but never a practical interest, I had to I had to learn myself because there was no film teacher, so to speak. And in the Aga Khan program, we were there to work as architects. So they're amateur student films from 30 years ago, but revisiting them, it was poignant to me is how that then informed how I was to work as an architect by taking that camera as an essentially recording. And I would sometimes just set it up and let it run. So it had a lot of tape to choose from to tell stories that had little to do with the actual architecture we were doing, but also everything to do with it, because the architecture is for the people. It was in the mosques. I didn't have an architecture problem. I had a research project, but it kind of was a way to communicate back to myself and eventually in the work that we were doing, because you can take notes, you can take photographs, but that whole visual. And I said, I wanted to tell a story and to narrow things down to a story, just be able then to see, especially in the city, in Sana'a, try to see the city through the activities of Matei and his father. And of course, during that period when they weren't around, and I had to find them in different, usually they were at the souk where they were the ways, but there were all these other opportunities just to film. And there was a lot of hours. And luckily one of my colleagues from the Aga Khan program, Sabah, who's Yemeni, was my translator. And otherwise it would be, but mostly it was passive, just hence like the children, you're with the camera. And surprisingly, not being, you know, a journalist, just being a young architecture student, the camera opened things up. It didn't create, like the young men who were dancing. I was walking the streets at night and they invited us in. I was with a very dear friend of mine who's a Turkish architect. He was in the program, and in to experience Yemeni music. And like I said, it had little to do with the Women's Center, but it had to do with the environment of being there and not being of there. So these little film, and now it's a lot easier. You know, students today have so much access, easy access to editing there. I had to transfer tapes. It was an arduous process to learn, but luckily they just let me have all the time I wanted, because they didn't want all of that. They didn't have a need for that equipment. They were moving on. That was 1990 and 1991. They were moving into early digital forms. So it was really a process about a young architect trying to use the film medium to understand where I was sent to do some work. They were essentially diaries. And then I had to, hence being an architect, and having studied film just through movies and reading on film, I started storyboarding, and it helped kind of, and then that's how things like the visual of the boy running up, they become emblematic, especially when you start sketching what you shot. So in any case, there was, and very, you know, much thanks to the Aga Khan program, who funded this, and the arts programs at MIT, who was able to fund it.
Well, Andre, I think in what you just described, I think you've offered a ton of sort of foundational thoughts, right, for our students or participants who may be chosen to develop their short films. You know, observation, right, being there to observe, letting things happen around you, you know, and asking questions. You know, you were pretty brave to go to say, hey, I've got these papers and I've got this money, you know, not to say we want to put anybody at risk, but, you know, to have the courage to ask the questions that you want to ask. I think all of these things are really valuable. And I also want to bring it back to this question of cities and the types of things that you were sort of engaging with as you were in Kazan and you were in Sana'a. So what is your perspective on this relationship and the multifaceted sort of components of contemporary and historic? I was really struck in the Sana'a video because, you know, you have these modern men dancing, you know, and you have the barber shop and you have, you know, the sort of life of the city, but then you have a very nostalgic feeling souk, and, you know, sort of with the historic infrastructure around it. What do you feel in terms of those relationships based on your experiences, say, in those two places?
Well, that's a good question, because what we were assigned to do for that workshop was to design a women's health center in the center of a historic city, and they have unreinforced buildings made out of, you know, essentially baked earth that go up 6-7 stories, and we had to provide a kind of a modern facility but fit within the context. And if anyone's, you know, seen images of Sana'a, which you should, it's a magical city, the way they built this architecture in the old city. So in that one,
Maybe that he can go back a bit and go back to some of those overlooking views of just a few.
The city. Yeah, and so, you know, we were tasked to design a modern facility, but within the context of historical. And it was under Masood and Ronald Lukoc, who was also the lead of the program, and he written a lot about the Yemeni and the architecture of Sana'a. So there was this, and when Khalil was beginning to speak about how the international, is essentially the international style, seen as colonialism, was overput. I mean, you can't put a glass box in the middle of a high desert and then expect it to behave, so to speak, without all this external mechanical equipment, air conditioning equipment. And this architecture exists is so suited to its temperate climate. So, you know, we were actually, there was a move at that point in the Aga Khan program. Well, where does modernism start and where does it stop? Where is it applicable? They had a program where we were building, they brought in specialists. We were building from clay bricks. We were actually building in the workshops at MIT in miniature structures out of whatever indigenous material to kind of bring back, this is early 90s, a sway of students from all over the world about how indigenous means, and this is, I mean, the Arcadia education of what Saif's done is amazing, because that's what where the program was trying to push it. Unfortunately, that program was dissolved and only became a history program. But when I was at a dinner with the Aga Khan several years ago, and he was at another table, and I walked up to him to say how influential that program, that workshop program was for all the students. And we're so many of us in touch still over 30 years, and many have gone into academia, some have gone into practice like I have. But that emphasis at that time was actually how to work within its context, and looking and having Saif explain how he came about the floating, school was really how we were trying to, they were trying to say, think out of the box, but think back to how people were building. And my thing is that you can only spend so much time, like I say, behind the drawing board. And one way of getting out for me was to force myself to to learn how to use the camera, first of all, and take it and engage it. And I found it interesting being introduced to you, that your students are on this thing. And it's, yes, you have to be fearless in order to basically say you don't have, if you want to be a documentarian, you have to put your ego back and you have to just let the camera essentially roll. And it's in the editing where you start showing who you are, as opposed to what necessarily is out there. And that was difficult for me without any training. But it was interesting. So.
Well, and definitely, and I think these films really demonstrate what can be learned through observation, and what sort of trajectories one can take, right? Like sort of, you basically were there and people came up to you and said, hey, check this out, and sort of allowing those things to happen is also really important. We can all go in with plans, and that's amazing, but teaching has taught me that the best plan never really ends up that way, right? So, and I think architecture often sort of aligns with that sentiment as well. So thank you so much, Andre, for offering your perspective, for allowing us to show these films. These are unpublished films, by the way, y'all. Okay, so Andre has offered us a unique opportunity to view them, and we're going to be maybe speaking about maybe getting them out there in other ways. But thank you so much, Andre. And I want to open up to all of the participants. I know we've gone over every single workshop session, and I apologize, but it's just how things go on Zoom. But do we have any questions? Actually, getting back to Nilam's question for Saif, how would you articulate the connection between form, function, and values? Values of your own, values of the local community in Bangladesh as it relates to the Arcadia Education Project? Saif, you're muted. I'm sorry. You'll have to.
I muted it because at times you get noise that could be. Anyway, no, but I'm talking about values. Yeah, it is not going to be the same with everyone. When you have a good alignment of values, I think successful things materialize. So as an architect, I have been always inclined in working projects or people who are taking up this challenge of reducing inequality and bringing people together. Most of my work that I have shown earlier before the school was for that kind of clients working to make people's life a little better. Who were deprived, who were facing a lot of but not like that going out and doing some charity work. Okay, I'm kind of touched by this thing, but you become part of the whole thing. So you go and you situate yourself. So here in the school, we had three groups of people. One was the architect, one was the client, and the users who actually would be using that. And I would say that initially people were not very kind of not appreciative, but not very enthusiastic that what's happening. Why aren't we trying to do something without filling up the land? Why you are building something with bamboo? We should build something with concrete. We should raise the ground. So there was a conflict. So here is the architect and the client who are trying to go with the understanding that they have based on their values. And then there is this people who will be ultimately the users of the environment. So there was but I think at the end we could impress upon the people that know one can look into alternatives. You can have your facility and you can also look at the environment in that way. So I think that's how you bring them together, form, function, and other things, and values, and that would be something. So one needs to look into those aspects that I'm saying. It's not only that you see it only from your point of view, but you also have to switch places and you try to find out from that other person, the user, how they're going to see it. So it helps in that way. I hope this helps. Questions.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, there you are. I will also put some short response to your question that you Almas had already, Ria had already shared with me. Okay, Vilam?
Thank you so much.
Yeah, and as we work to wrap up tonight, if you have any other questions, please raise your hand or put them in the chat. Fahim, yeah, please go ahead.
I always have questions. First one is for Saif. With dealing with a plot of land that gets submerged for a long period of time, traditional building is the way that you would do it is grading the land pretty much to put a foundation. How did you deal with erosion in the when it's wet seasons? Because that would, in my mind, the erosion wouldn't be a problem during the wet season because it's floating on the water. The foundation is whatever the water level is. But once that water is gone, wouldn't it make it uneven, and that could destroy the structures if it's putting stresses in the wrong places in the bamboo?
This is a very interesting and important question, I would say. How do you actually deal with so many variables? It's not only that it's a very quiet thing, water comes and goes away. It's not like that. You're absolutely right. So erosion is an issue that depends where it is being built. Because the phenomenon of erosion and this land formation they're not happening in one place. I mean, if a bank of a river erodes, the land formation happens either in the riverbed or on the edge of the river on the other side. So there's two sides. So if you, and you don't have any control, because it is the, it's the natural process that which side is going to erode. So one can map it, one can predict it. So when you go and if you are in an erosion prone area, I would say that you have to take a different strategy. I mean, we were in an area which was kind of a place where land has formed over the years and it gets flooded, but we were not in an area. But I would love to look into that aspect too, but I don't think that one can come up with a response right away. Last year, I was mentioning about this flood. There were images in the media that some very well-built schools, 2 or 3 story, which were situated in that kind of area, which just kind of was devoured by the river because of the erosion. All the investment had gone into the water. So we need to think about that. Thank you. I think that would be good enough for now.
Yeah. Did you have another question, Fahim?
I do have questions for the others, but follow-up question to that first one, actually, about the erosion. How also did you make sure that the school did not float away during the high seasons? Traditionally, I would think of, like, for example, boat docking, where you do tie a rope. However, I don't know how well that holds in a monsoon, considering the amount of weight that that structure takes. How did you make sure that didn't float away in this area? Oh, and the last one would be the plumbing. You mentioned there was a septic tank. Traditionally, you use gravity to help that stuff go into the plumbing area. How did you make sure that all goes to the septic? And then how was the way that you cleaned that out?
Thanks again. I mean, these were all sort of attempted, but not, I would not say that they all worked the way it was planned. For example, the keeping the school in its place, not that it drifts away. I mean, when the water comes, it's going to, because there's no barrier. So we use guide posts. We had intermediate posts placed between, because they were separate modules. It was not one long stretch of building. It was separated different modules. So the posts were in between the modules, and then there were mechanisms to make the school stay in the place, but also allow for that to rise and kind of drop back. But it didn't really work 100%. The second monsoon, the post gave away, because for a considerable amount of period of time, the post remained underwater. And so the school actually drifted away, and it needed to be brought back to this site. So, and it was a floating structure. I mean, so it was brought back to the site, but the water had to be there. You could not bring it back when there's no water. So it was brought back, and then it was kept in position, because one could feel that where the posts were, because that was underwater. So we had to do it, and then we had to replace the post, new posts were put, and that worked. But last monsoon, again, we had the same problem. And so that is one issue. So this is, we are working on further. This is not that the story has ended here. With the toilet and the septic tank, the toilet was fine. I mean, okay, you have all the, but the septic tank, it really gave us a lot of trouble. And we had to sort of go for 3 revisions. I mean, the first one didn't work, and we had to work the second one, and we have to make a further revision to that. So this is a project in progress, I would say. I'm not saying that one can be very sure or definitive about things, especially when you're using a technology like this. But if you're building it, so for example, even in Bangladesh, we had more money, you'd build something. Because we have these pontoons made of steel that allows people to get down from river crafts into the land. So this is nothing. I mean, you are building these amphibious and other floating structures all over the world. But here we had to also find out a solution which was sort of crafted and easily fabricable in a situation, not that you need a huge workshop to build this. So that was the idea.
My goodness, you've just given us a number of lessons to take forward in short film development. Be flexible, right? You'll have to come up with solutions. So be creative about it. And you're always going to have a budget, so deal with it, right? Like, so, you know, so these are, I feel the applicability just oozing out of us here. So thank you for that. Well,
Saif was quite observant about the work. I mean, the question that he asked are very precise and specific to the construction aspect. And no, thank you. Great.
Well, Fahim, I know you said you had some other questions. Perhaps we could send those via email. And if anyone else has additional questions, we could send those via email. But I think we should wrap up the session here to ensure that everyone has proper, well, for Saif, morning time, and for us, evening time. So thank you so much, everyone, for your participation today. And a special thank you to Khalil, Saif, and Andre.